Hi, welcome to Blender Tutor. I'm Tom, and today we're going to go over creating this soothing Mograph animation in Blender 2.9. Okay, so let's get started by deleting our default cube in the lamp. Add in a plane, scale it up by 5, go into edit mode, and let's subdivide. I'm going to do 50. Basically, you want enough subdivisions to ensure that once we're animating this plane with the wave modifier, it'll be a smooth transition. And one other thing you're going to want to make sure that you have is down in the bottom right corner. When I first installed Blender 2.9, it didn't have any of this information down here, so I had to actually go down here. I right clicked, and then you could turn on scene statistics and it'll show you this information. The reason we're going to need that is we want to know how many vertices we have in this mesh. All right, so before we go any further, let's just add in an icosphere, and we can keep it at 2. It could go down to 1. I'm going to add a subdivision modifier anyway. Let's just move it out of the way for now, and let's set it to smooth. And you could even add your subdivision surface modifier now. You could hit Control 2, which will set it to 2 divisions. If it is slowing down your viewport though, you can turn it down to 1 while we're looking at it. And now on the plane, what we're going to do is you need to look at the number of verts you have. So we have 2,946. I'm going to add in a new particle system. We're going to keep it on emitter. And we need the number of particles to be the exact same amount as we have verts. So 2,946. And you're going to want to set the start and end frame to 0, and then we want these particles to stick around for the length of our animation. I'm just going to do 10 seconds at 24 frames a second, so it'll be 240 frames. So I'll set the lifetime just to something a little longer than that. And you'll notice if we press play, it will drop. So the other thing we're going to want to do, let's go to the physics and change physics types to none. So now they will stay there. Obviously this doesn't look right though. So the next thing we're going to do is go to source. Let's change it from faces to vertices. And it's starting to get there, but you could tell there's something not quite right still. So the other thing we're going to want to do is turn off random order. And now it will place 1 particle on every vertex on this mesh. So as long as the amount of particles matches the amount of vertices in this model, you will be good. Next thing we're going to want to do is change the render type from halo particle to an object. And then we can just go down here to object, change it to our icosphere. The last thing we're going to do is just play with this size, the scale of the object. And we're going to actually have multiple layers of this plane. So I actually kept the top one a bit smaller. I'll just do like 0.04. And before we go any further, let's just set some materials real quick. So I'm actually going to add a HDRI for rendering, for lighting, I mean. So go to the World Properties tab, set the color to Environment Texture, and then let's just load up an HDRI. I got this one from hdrihaven.com. I like to use the Studio Small. You get some good reflections on shiny objects. So the next thing I'm going to do is with the plane selected, I'm going to add a material. I'll just call this transparent. And the only thing I'm going to do is change the surface from principled to the transparent. And on blend mode under settings, change that to alpha hashed. And now we just won't be able to see that in the render view. And then for our icosphere, I'm going to make a new material. Let's go to the shading view, go to the rendered viewport. So I did a couple things for my material to get the final look that I achieved. For one, we're going to need a color ramp, which by itself won't really do anything, but the next thing we can do is add in a object info node and use this random input. So it'll kind of just pull a random color for each icosphere. The other thing I'm going to do is go to film and transparent, just so we could kind of see everything a little better. And now all we had to do is we could choose some colors. So I like to use uigradients.com, and you just have a bunch of pre-made gradients that you could kind of look through and find something that you think looks nice. So maybe I will go for this wiretap look for this one. And all you have to do is up here, you could click on the color and it'll automatically copy the hex code of the color to your clipboard. So now I could go in here, go to hex, and just paste that. I could add in one more and we'll do all three colors. So I'll do that real quick. Cool. So we have that to get some random colors. It's a good starting point. And you could also kind of adjust the color ramp to tweak how much of a certain color you're getting. If you want one more often than another, you just kind of play with these. And the other thing I'm going to do, because I want a little more contrast, is I'm going to lighten this a little bit. So desaturate the color so it's a little closer to white. I'll do the same for this red one. And then for the purple, I'm going to actually bring that a little darker. Yeah, I like that. So the other thing I did for this was I set the specular down to like 0.3, and then the roughness kind of turned up. Actually, I think I did it around like 0.35. And then I turned on the clear coat, which is basically a second reflection channel on this, and I just put that up to 100. And I pretty much kept the roughness on the clear coat down to 0. So that way I could get this soft, rough reflection, and I can get a sharper reflection. The other thing we're going to want to do is in the EV render settings, turn on screen space reflections. I'm just going to do two more things. I'm going to add in an emission shader and bring that color from the color ramp into that as well. I'm going to bring a mix shader. And I'm going to bring a layer weight. Put facing into the factor. And now I'm just going to kind of tweak this till I get, I still want some shading, but this kind of makes it more of a shadeless material look. So I'm just going to find a value that looks good to me. Kind of makes it look like a waxy material. All right. So it's not looking like much yet, but once we start duplicating this, it will start getting there. The last thing I want to do before we start duplicating the plane is add the wave modifier. So make sure the plane is selected, and let's do a couple things. Let's add subdivision surface on that, just so it has a bit more resolution for the animation. And I'll keep that up at 2. And now let's add a wave modifier. And you're going to want to make sure the particle system is actually the very bottom modifier, or else this won't work. So I'll just keep it in solid render view for now, because you can see the default setting for this is just wild. So you can just keep it playing, and I'm going to maybe change the height a little. So that is okay. Under time, let's slow it down. So it's at 0.25 right now. Let's go to like 0.1. We'll also set the offset for this. So I'm going to go to the layout view so I can actually see my timeline. Go to the first frame of the timeline. And for offset, I just want to make sure it has already started its wave, so it doesn't start on a flat surface. That's honestly not too bad. I might tweak this a little more, but you can kind of set this. Yeah, this is kind of nice. Changing the narrowness. Kind of like that. So I would say just play around with this until you get it to a motion that you like. And then the next thing is I'm going to duplicate this. And for this one, I'm going to turn off motion on one of these 2 axes. So you kind of see which one you like better. And I would also, since this is keeping all the same settings, I would mess around with the offset and with, maybe the height and this width and all of that. Even the time. You just kind of want to break up the variation so it doesn't look like a constant loop of the exact same thing. And if you want, you could keep layering these effects. So it doesn't look like much right now, but this is where it quickly becomes a little more interesting. We can take our plane now and just Shift D, then hit Z to move it down on the Z axis. And now all we have to do is, with that second layer selected, the second plane, go to the particle system, and before we change any settings, hit this 2 right here. So it'll make it its own separate particle system. And now we can go down to the render tab, and I'm gonna bring the scale up a little bit more. And since we have that random input on the color, it will automatically randomize the color of those as well. And you could see by just duplicating that a couple times, you're already getting a really cool effect. So I'm just going to do that like once or twice more and change the scale each time. And remember, every time you duplicate it, you will have to hit that number again to make sure it's turning it into its own separate particle system. And I basically just want to duplicate it enough times that once I actually point a camera at this and render it, we're not going to be able to see any gap in between it when we render, which right now we definitely can. So I might just add one more, and that should probably take care of it. And for this bottom one, I'm pretty much just going to bring the size up big enough that I basically want them to be touching. I might just give them a little bit of space. Let's just see what that looks like. Yeah, even if you can see a little bit through that, that should be okay. What I did for my render is I'm going to change the dimensions real quick. I'll just do a square render for this one. And I'm going to change the camera type to an orthographic view. And then I'm just going to adjust the orthographic scale until it's close enough that I'm not getting any edges. And then with the camera selected, you could just hit RR and kind of orbit around until you have a nice view. One easy way to rotate around your object is right now, since I have the 3D cursor in the center, I can change my orbit to the 3D cursor. And now with the camera selected, if I hit RZ, I can kind of just rotate around the center of the scene and find an angle that looks cool. The next thing I want to do, well, let's watch it a little bit. Cool. So obviously you're going to have to adjust it so that you're not getting any empty space, which in this scene, I'm going to probably just have to bring it down a little closer. I'm going to bring that orbit back to my bounding box center, which will just kind of rotate from the camera's perspective now. And if you're having trouble finding an angle that you don't keep seeing an empty space, you can just zoom in a little more. But you probably want to keep it far enough out that you see some of the cool motion from this. The last thing I'm going to do, other than play with the lighting a little bit, is I do want some depth of field. So you go to viewport, turn on show limits. So you'll see, let me go to wireframe. So this yellow crossbar is kind of where it will be focusing. And under depth of field, now I could kind of just adjust that. I'm going to bring this down to like 0.15, pretty low, pretty shallow depth of field. And now in the render view on Eevee, we can adjust this and find a spot that looks good. So you might have something like that where a lot of your frames out of focus. But I did find that this looks pretty nice within a really shallow depth of field. Since I'm using Blender 2.9, I also like to turn on motion blur, which will increase your render time a little bit, but you get some nice added motion blur with that, which I feel like it adds something to the animation, makes it a little more smooth. And even ambient occlusion can help with this one. Turn that up to 1.5, maybe not that high, maybe like 1. And I might mess around with the focal distance a little more, bring it a little closer. I will also, to set the look for this, I like to, under the Eevee settings under color management, I like to use either medium high contrast or high contrast. So I'm just gonna find a frame, kind of like a test frame, just so I can render and see what it looks like with the motion blur. Might be a little strong. I'm gonna maybe turn that down to like 0.3. Yeah, that seems a little better. And really the only other thing I want to do, go back to the shading tab. And I want to change this to world. And we could click on the HDR node, hit Control T if you have the Node Wrangler add-on. And now we can just rotate along the Z and kind of adjust the lighting. Yeah, that looks kind of cool. For my original render, the only other thing I did was added another area lamp and kind of messed with the lighting just to get some cool reflections, but honestly, I think this looks pretty nice. If you have the camera selected and go to the camera tab, if you go down to viewport display, under this bottom section, you could turn this up so it kind of is only showing you what the render view is going to see. You could also turn this show overlays off, so you're basically just going to see your clean render in the viewport. Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with how this looks, so I'm going to render this out now and we can take a look at the final animation. Right, the one other thing I was going to look at real quick before I fully render this is maybe playing with a little bloom and probably turn that up to 0.9, turn the radius down to 5, intensity down a little bit. Just a little subtle bloom there. All right, so now I will render this out and we'll be back after that. Okay, so here is my final result. I actually did go back in and I adjusted the time and the height of this animation because it was really erratic for my first render, and I should have checked it in real time because when you're watching it in Blender, especially in a render view in Eevee, it's not usually playing in real time. So it looked slower than it actually was. So when I rendered it out, it was super speedy. I'll show a quick clip of it right here. But I would recommend you could actually export the viewport view when you're first checking what an animation is going to look like and you don't want to render out the entire thing and find out that the timing's off. But anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something from this. And as always, make sure to check me out on Instagram. I'm at ThomasLatvies3D. I post a lot of my new art there, and you'll also hear about any new tutorials I have up over here. All right, take care. Bye.